Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever y'all get this. I would hope that my point doesn't fall on deaf ears. This is a picture right here. This is Hindi Chini Bhai, and this other picture is Hindi Rusi Bhai. But first, we start with Hindi Chini. Oh, give me back. There we go. All these extra things I got going on. Got to have those pages up. Anyhow, what you see here is a picture of three Indians and one Chinese. Chinese, obviously white skin compared to these Indians. And in the picture with the Russian, where they look a little sweet, holding hands like this, looking, suspect, right? But that's the signal to how strong their so-called brotherhood is. Now, notice they got the white dude's arm in front of the Indian dudes, but you know that's to signify that they're the one who's ahead. But we're not even gonna worry about none of that. And we know that most Russians don't even look like this dude. Most Russians look like a Mongoloid and a Turk mixed. But what y'all need to get is this. Did you know that, let's just look him up. Sergey Brin. There we go. Bang. Did you know that this cat right here, Sergey, Mr. Brin, is of Jewish origin? I'm just going to blow that up for y'all so that we all can see that. Jewish parents. Now, just okay, people don't try to get anything messed up. One second. Acting crazy. I got something for that ass. Google never does that to me. Hmm. 1988 to 1991. So he was actually born when it was still the Soviet Union. You understand? That Sergey Brin dude. Now, why that's so important is because maybe I have it here. Ooh, there we go. Bang. Born Pikai Sundararajan, but he goes by Sundar Pikai now. So he just changed his name around. This cat's of Indian origin. What are the chances, the odds, the compound probability that a cat born right around the same time as my dude would be the one to take over for not only the CEO of Alphabet but the CEO of Google? And just so y'all don't think I'm tripping, one second. This cat is full blown Indian. He's not exactly dark skin, but he ain't all the way light skinned either. So y'all get what I'm saying though. But look at that. Look at his face though. He probably comes more than likely from the Punjab class, and there's probably people in his bloodline that come from the Turkish Khazarian bloodline. That's more than likely. You can't find all that just by looking at these dudes' backgrounds. They're not going to tell you that much information. So imagine Sergey and Pikai right on holding hands right here, right? No, that is just in case y'all didn't know, India and Russia's relations right now are as tight as ever. This is why the stuff that they did in the Indian Ocean was allowed to happen. I mean, I need y'all to understand this. India's nuclear powered. If they really wanted to make a stink about, China and Russia being in their ocean and what they call the Indian Ocean, they could have done so. They didn't do that. So when people think I'm tripping or don't think I know what I'm talking about, I know way more than I lay on, and then I let on. Because if I let it all out at once, they'll try to kill me. You get what I'm saying? So we just have to be smart. Come on, go back. I don't know why this shit is even acting like that. There we go. Back to this picture. Hindi Chini bye bye. Need y'all to understand. I could claim that the posturing that India and China have done for the last going on 60 years is mostly political. And it's to keep the Western, so-called Western powers at bay. Uh, but nobody wants to take the quick thought to look at this right here. The one thing all countries that are nuclear powered have in common is the Khazar and the Ilkhan Connect. Every single one of them. People don't look at it like that. People don't even understand that. The Germans had nuclear war. They had nuclear bombs, nuclear material when the war first started. World War II first started. They could have nuked everybody back then if they wanted to. They didn't. But once again, Hitler's restraint was way greater than his aggression, and people really will never understand that until I break down all these things. How do you steal a scientist from Europe, him come over here, and y'all develop the atomic bomb in a matter of a year or so, 2 years, and listen, you want me to believe that, and you're telling me that they already didn't have the atomic bomb? Come on, man, that doesn't even make sense. Let's go back. Let's look at this real quick. The years of Hindi Chini bye bye. Zhao's first visit to Delhi. During the years following the signing of the Panchshir Agreement, Delhi continued its efforts to champion the newly independent nations of Asia and Africa. The intellectual elite of Delhi looked at the Chinese Revolution as part of the Great Asian Resurgence. Its political thought that India could enhance her image by becoming the champion of China's cause in every possible form and become the promoter of Beijing's entry into the United Nations. 2 months after Ambassador Haven had signed the accord, the Chinese Premier Zhao Enlai visited Delhi for the first time. He was on his way back from Geneva when he had attended the conference in Indochina. He needed some support in favor of a negotiated settlement to which Americans would not be a party. Nehru was the ideal neutral Asian leader to back the Chinese plan for a peaceful solution to the Indo-Chinese imbroglio. Zhao stopped in Delhi for 3 days and had five long sessions with Nehru. Now let's just go ahead and do ourselves. Sidebar that. No, not chicanery. It doesn't mean chicanery, does it? Let's see. Okay. No, it doesn't mean chicanery. So, a confusing situation. Complicated situation. Really, what's complicated is whoever controls that border has more power because it's their border. So you get to control the commerce, so to speak, and you get to have more control of more land. You understand what I'm saying? So you can't. We both can't have the same border, pretty much. We can't. We both can't control it. Only one of us can control it. Where are we at? Zhao stopped in Delhi for 3 days and had 5 long sessions with Nehru. The most surprising aspect of these talks was that Tibet, as well as the border problem, which had been the main issues between the two nations, were not mentioned even once. Which I told you, the border issues. The discussion centered on the Geneva talks and the role that India could be invited to play in a brokered solution. In the course of discussions, Nehru repeatedly brought up the question of acceptance of the five principles by the other Asian nations. This was according to him that panacea for all ills and ultimate solution for peace in Asia and in the world. Small matters such as the Tibet issue and the border question were ignored. This confirms that for Nehru, at least the main feature of the agreement was not the content, Tibet's trade and pilgrimage, but the preamble. Nehru's visit to Beijing in October 1954. The visit of the Indian Prime Minister to Beijing marks the apogee of the friendship between India and China and perhaps also brought the first doubts in Nehru's mind. Now let's just go ahead and look up this word. This is how I know what stuff means normally before I don't normally do this, but I'll normally record and read it for the first time. Is the only managed word? No. The highest point in the development of something, climax or culmination. So this is the highest point, the apex. The visit of Indian Prime Minister to Beijing marks the apex or the apogee of the friendship between India and China, and perhaps now this is all conjecture. Word. This is a Westerner trying to explain how Easterners think. Word. Now, I'm not going to get too carried away into the whole Punjab thing and the whole Ilkhanate thing, but do y'all not believe that the border issue goes back thousands of years ago? Like India saying that at first this was our border. There is nothing to talk about if you're talking about ancient history. The Indians have the Chinese beat. They were on the scene. Nobody knew who the Chinese were when the Indians were around. Nobody knew who the Chinese were when Alexander was around. Come on. So, I mean, like, you got to really look at it like that. And the Indians' history stretches all the way back into ancient Egypt. So you can't act like if India were to say that's our border, that's their border. That's it. That's all. For the first time, October 9, the Indian Prime Minister met Mao in the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. The great helmsman began the talk by dwelling on the age-old associations and the new friendship between China and India. This remark speaks for itself. While the Indian leader was speaking of a 2,000 years of friendship, Mao was speaking of new friendship. So I told you, once again, I wasn't even reading the article. I was just breaking it down in my mind. Nehru had two talks with Mao, but neither party raised the Tibetan issue or the border question. Mao was more interested to know the reaction of the Indian leader on the use of the atomic bomb. It is during this meeting that Mao first termed the bomb as a paper tiger, according to the Dr. Li, the private physician of Mao, when Nehru visited China in 1954. The chairman flabbergasted Nehru during the meeting. No shit he did. To say that the shit is a paper tiger, cuz that's bullshit, nigga. Did he see what it did to Japan, cuz? He's tripping. And just in case y'all don't know, Douglas MacArthur wanted to nuke the Chinese. Douglas Bloodbath MacArthur, okay, wanted to nuke the Chinese way back in the 50s. Y'all can look this shit up if you don't believe me. He wouldn't have thought Mao wouldn't have thought this shit was no paper tiger then. Trust it. And now that the Chinese have actually nuclear power, if they had nukes back then, Mao would have never fixed his lips to say that. During the three meetings between Nehru and Zhou Enlai, once again, the small matters were not discussed, except for a short mention about the Chinese maps, which show large parts of India and Burma within the Chinese territory. Nehru hesitantly told Zhou, as regards maps, I just casually mentioned to you some of the anxieties of our neighbors. We are not worried on this point. Our frontiers are clear, but I mentioned in the case of Burma because questions of this kind become a handle in the hands of the enemy. But as I said, I am sure the maps were old maps and you did not mean it. Follow what he's saying. When he says old maps, he's talking about maps of when the Indians were completely oppressed, word, and they had been taken over by not just the Punjab, but the Ilkhanate. Once again, these cats were all lockstep, yo. So when the Ilkhanate was in charge of Iran, they were in charge of stuff in India all the way back to China, to the Mongol Empire. So this stuff goes back to when all those things were happening. And The Chinese tried to improperly position themselves. Once again, do I think that this is just, as I said, posturing? A lot of it's just posturing. Because you can't, there's no way you're going to get me to believe that both of these nations become nuclear power and Russia becomes nuclear power if they all are pretty much on the same accord and are all lockstep. There's no way that that happens. Because the Khazar class that was here, okay, that brought those weapons here, right on, that brought the that sorcery here, I should say, they're they're only willing to do what they feel they must. Why do you think they really allowed Cuba to be nuclear powered? Because it was a way to check the United States. Where they couldn't just have this nuclear powered country all over here all by itself and totally be out of reach. Why do you think the Russians have such a good relations with the Cubans and things like that of that nature? You have to really start to put the situation together, y'all. And I know this isn't in this article, but you have to use everything you know. The Indian Prime Minister, let's read. Skipped it. Finally, at the end of the meeting, Nehru dared ask Zhao a question directly linked to a 6-month-old agreement on Tibet. For a simple matter such as the rights to go on a pilgrimage, the Indians and Tibetans were harassed. Nehru explained as mildly as possible to his counterpart the difficulties encountered by the pilgrims. There is a small matter which I take this opportunity to mention to you. Some complaints have recently been received from pilgrims going to Tibet. Some of them are apparently harassed by guards, and I hope that Your Excellency will look into this matter. As an example of the sort of harassment to which these pilgrims are subjected, I would mention that one of my friends was stopped by the border guards who told him that he could not be regarded as a pilgrim because he was not wearing a monk's gown. The Indian Prime Minister had still not realized that the five principles were a one-way road. Two small incidents indicate the future direction in which the relations between India, Tibet, and China would go. During the course of his visit, Nehru had the occasion to meet the young Dalai Lama for the first time. And as we've seen, Tibet and the border issue has been totally ignored in the talks with the Chinese leaders. This encounter with the young Lama was Nehru like a mirror reminding him of the main provisions of the treaty. The Dalai Lama recalls, when we heard we will meet him, there was a bit of excitement. Pandit Nehru, led by Zhao Enlai and many Chinese dignitaries, were lining up when he reached the palace where I was standing. Zhao Enlai said, "This is the Dalai Lama." Nehru remained motionless, no speech, not looking in the eyes. He just stood in front of me without speech, without moving, motionlessly. He remained like that. I was a bit embarrassed. I told through the Chinese interpreter, "I have heard a lot about you, and today I'm very happy to meet you." Nehru did give a particular response. He seemed maybe happy, then he went to the next person. This was my first experience with him. That day I thought and felt from Nehru's side that there will be no support for Tibet and no support for the Dalai Lama. During a short moment, many things that occurred from 1949 to 1954 passed in his mind like lightning. Now, let me just go ahead and say something to y'all. I'm not going to read all this article. No, you know what? Let's just knock it out. We're almost done. We're almost done. With the strange silence of the Indian Prime Minister, a sign that he had begun to realize that he had betrayed his own statement 4 years earlier in Lak Sabha. The Bandung Conference. The period following the visit to Nehru to Beijing was marked by a lull in the relations between the three nations. In Tibet, the Dalai Lama returned to Lhasa after receiving some assurances from Mao that so-called communist reforms would not be immediately enforced on the Tibetan people. Upon his return, Nehru became busy with the preparation of the Afro-Asian Conference in Bandung. Had to read that. The conference seemed the culmination of his personal ambitions. He had always wanted to be at the center of the stage amongst the newly decolonized nations. In Bandung, he was able to introduce his friend Zhao Enlai to to other Asian and African leaders. So first and foremost, when people try to say that China's trying to rape the continent, man, these dudes, once again, I told y'all, the black Mongoloids over there have been working with their part breed and half breed Mongoloid children for forever, nigga. You can't rape a continent that's not theirs, and you can't rape something that they're. You can't be raping them if they're helping you rape the continent. Can you hear me? These encounters in Bandung and later at Delhi would, with an apparently moderate Zhao Enlai, convinced Nehru of the sincerity of the Chinese communist rules, he would discover the communist true face in October 1962. That's when they fought at the border. That's when the Chinese pretty much got the best of the Indians. And, you know, people pretty much say since then they ain't been cool, but we're just going to keep reading. Though the purpose of the conference was not to discuss small matters, Tibet was mentioned one day during the conversation between prime ministers of Ceylon, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Burma. Zhao explained his views on the question. Nehru later reported, when asked if he wanted to push communism into Tibet, Chow and Lei laughed and said that there could be no such a question as Tibet was very far indeed from communism. It would be it would be thoroughly impractical to try to establish a communist regime in Tibet, and the Chinese government had no such wish. Tibet was an autonomous region of China, and they had no desire whatever to interfere with its customs or ways of life. They had gone to Tibet because it was an integral part of Chinese state and because it had been used for imperialist intrigues, meaning thereby the British recently and previously Tsarist Russia. Listen, what they're trying to say is that we want to keep white folks' hands off of it because they done already dirtied it up. But it don't matter because they're not the people either. The Mongoloids that are in China are not the original people of China. So them saying that is really kind of, like two-faced and double-sided. But anyway, let's just knock the rest of this down. We only got a little bit left to go, y'all. Just a little bit left to go. Later, when someone asked Zhao in Tibet his answer, you cannot introduce socialism or communism to Tibet. You just cannot do it. Maybe 50 years, 100 years later, they may do it. I do not know. Unfortunately for Tibetans, communism was already introduced on a very large scale in eastern Tibet, and the Dalai Lama was returning to Lhasa in 1955, witnessed some of the dramatic consequences for the populations of the provinces of Amdo and Kham. Nehru was awed by Zhao, but he was completely blind to the danger for India as an emerging power. But was he completely blind to the danger for India of an emerging powerful China? He was probably not, though he could not grasp all the implications for India at that time. During this period, the Chinese Liberation Army was busy consolidating its strategic occupation of Tibet, building several roads and airstrips. This was unquestionably their main priority. No doubt that reforms could be postponed till China fully controlled the roof of the world. Stop right there. I need to stress, can't stress it enough, that the Chinese were still way further from their independence. Were that maybe China, mainland China, but Hong Kong didn't get their independence till like 98, dog. Were? So I just need people to really just to understand that 1962 versus 1998 for a major part of what you would consider China, Hong Kong. Hong Kongers could think Hong Kong is a part of China. Fuck the bullshit. Just like Taiwan is a part of China. Word? Uh, they can have their funky ass little attitudes and their funky ass ways about it. That's the truth. So you're talking about two different groups who were one is right on the cusp of getting full blown independence, under the threat of we will fucking overrun the British Isles and we don't give a fuck about getting nuked. You'll kill every last single one of us to the man type shit. They're not going to tell you that's what happened. That's how it breaks down. Okay, these white folks have to start really thinking like, is it really worth us having every Indian in it on the British Isles or anywhere else spread out through the Isles going fucking berserk? No, it's not. You'd have to bomb they'd have to have nuked their own islands. They'd have to have killed everything, y'all. It would have been ridiculous. So it's just easier to give you your independence and say, let's stop fucking with them. Let's see what they do all by themselves. And they've been doing just fine all by themselves. There's poor people all in the country because the Punjab class. I can't stress it enough. Word. It would be very difficult for me to believe that India was once a thriving civilization and the poorest of the poor didn't have anything to look forward to. So the most logical understanding is that in 982 to 1083 or whatever, that 100-year period where the Punjab really took over and marked their stamp in India, which would be the Khazar Turks. It really does signify how much they affected everything. And then to see how China is able to have controls of vast swaths of land later on down the line in the history until modern day tells us how powerful the Ilkhanate and just how strong the Mongol Empire actually truly was. Once again, they have Mongoloid type individuals all over the earth. Now let's go ahead and pick it up. The end of a civilization. A major consequence of the Panchshil Agreement was the advance of the communist ideology of the Tibetan Plateau. A new way of life, less compassionate, less enlightened, slowly took over the roof of the world. It is interesting to quote from the writings of Appa Pant, the political officer of Sikkim, who was dealing with Tibetan affairs in the Ministry of External Affairs. Pat was not only aware of the diplomatic and strategic importance of the recent events on the roof of the world, but was also conscious of the humane aspects of the disappearance of an ancient civilization. Pat writes, with all its shortcomings and discomforts, its inefficiencies, and unconquered physical dangers, here was a civilization with at least the intentions of maintaining a pattern of life in which the individual could achieve liberation. Come on, they said that they destroyed that. Pat readily admitted that he always felt a great admiration for China's culture and civilization, for its long histories and indeed its new revolution. However, he was very saddened by the Chinese incapacity to accept or even understand a philosophy not fitting in with the party line. Come on. He's like, why don't y'all want to get on board and actually play like a team? And China's like, fuck that. Pant, like many of his colleagues, felt that Tibetans had a lot to learn from the Chinese. In my travels in Tibet, I observed how disciplined the Chinese were. All their activities were directed towards the building of a new culture, a society of new men. Pant often discussed the Chinese generals posted in Lhasa. Pant often discussed with the Chinese generals posted in Lhasa, but they could only answer in terms of efficiency and discipline. Stop right there. What happened in China was they had became a nation of dope heads. I'm not going to break all of it down right now, but because the Ilkhanate, the Mongol Empire, had stretched all the way, pretty much to the fucking Atlantic Ocean almost, what happened is that, what you consider the Atlantic Ocean, what happened is this, is they used to be able to get the dope brought all the way through India, all the way back over to China, right? And it was getting high way back in the day. But when the British and the English, some French, some Spanish, some Portuguese, but mainly English and British soldiers showed up, or sailors showed up, fucked up from these wars, they started giving these dudes opium to try to help them, you know what I'm saying, get back to better. And obviously, when they did that, there were advantageous and opportunistic and overall predatorial individuals who would help turn regular folks in China, regular Mongoloid folks in China, into full-blown dope fiends. This is why they had to go about this whole shit in a real crazy type of way, because that never happened in India. You understand? And they did that so that way they could pacify the Mongoloid culture and pacify a very warlike nation. in this, in this aspect, once again, y'all know how I feel about Gentiles. I don't like calling them people. I refuse to acknowledge them as people. They're not people. We have to remember that during the 50s, the reforms had just started. Zhao Enlai's reaction to the Bandung Conference reflect this stance. The Panchil was perhaps too fresh for Chinese leaders to take a more radical approach. But the main factor which determines the Chinese approach was that roads and infrastructures were not sufficiently in place to stabilize the revolution, meaning that logistically speaking, they couldn't do what they needed to do all right then and there. Pat had support in the Ministry of External Affairs for his philosophical approach, but worse was the fact that even fewer could comprehend the strategic and military aspect of the events unfolding on the roof of the world. If Chinese leadership appeared to not have made up their minds about reforms, their main strategic objective was clear. Roads across Tibet and towards the Indian border were built on a war footing. And we should not forget that in 1955, construction of Tibetan Sakyen Highway cutting across Ladakh was in full swing, and that the roads head towards Nifa, now Aruna, Arunachal Pradesh, and Sikkim had already been completed. Zhao's words were definitely linked to the development of the communication infrastructure when he proclaimed that Tibetan society was not yet ripe for socialist changes. He's saying that we can't try to push all this shit on them at once, in short. Pent believed Nehru understood the depth of the conflict. However, the exigencies of power, the feeling that the Chinese must in no circumstance be upset, and the needless and nervous desperate to hurry to normalize India-China relations lost us the larger perspective of action. Actually, what it did was it made it to where, once again, y'all, I need y'all to understand, back then they were not nuclear powered. They were not. It's hard to believe that they both get nuclear powered if they stay hand in hand. And I showed y'all the Hindi Rusi bye bye. This is back in the 50s as well. There's no way you want me to believe that these relations would have been approved. There's no way. There's no way that once again, that the Khazars would have signed off on their Mongoloid cousins, their Punjab cousins, okay, their Russian brothers and sisters, however you want to see it, right? And their Cuban second cousins, right on, from even getting into that position. I'll explain the Cuban thing later. That's one of Rick's closest friends, and I don't really want to throw them under the bus into the wood chipper at this moment. Here we go. These are some of the factors which contributed to the progressive disappearance of one of the planet's most ancient religions from the earth to be replaced by a materialistic dictatorship. Pat was quite clear of the outcome of the situation. The Tibetans were hoping against hope. They could not get the assurances that they would get the benefits brought by the Chinese on the material plane, while the old system and the philosophy that taught and practiced a path towards liberation of the human mind from turmoil would be tolerated. This was perhaps the most serious consequences of the Panchil Agreement, an open support for the forces which led to the complete loss of a way of life based on eternal values shared within the Indian culture. Come on. This is written by Claude Arpey. He's the same dude that's down here. White looking dude. A Khazar, Indianish looking dude. Come on. That's his point of view. I don't agree with all that shit. But I'm just trying to break it down to y'all that it's more than what y'all think. So boom, let's just look at these pictures again before we roll out. India and Russia are brothers. 1956. Look how dark that Indian is in that picture. Right? Once again, let's just go ahead and check this out. Let's blow that up. Move that over. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Looking just like Claude. I'm sorry. The reason why most of these Chinese would comb their hair back, a lot of them comb their hair back like that right now, is because a lot of them have curly hair. So in order to avoid it being obvious, they slick it back. Just in case you didn't know. They know who they are. They know that some of them are part Negro. Why do you think they have the Afro Asian or Afro Indian or whatever the fuck conference they had? Because they understand. And don't think that all of those dudes in there were booty faced Africans. Plenty of those Africans would probably be bearded. But the point is that there's Africans who are mongoloids who look just like this, only they're black. Only they're dark skinned. That's it. So when y'all want to get mad at your boy or want to try to tell me it's this, that, and the other, and if I pull up the picture of the dude, remember the let me show y'all one more time. Damn. Look at my guy's face right here. Just look at his face. Or now look at these faces of these Indians. Look at that nose. Look at that nose. Look at that face. Again. Look at that nose. His face is more gaunt now because he's so old. But it does give credence to the fact that they say that he is descendant of somebody who looks like this. It's very believable. And that these cats are a mixture of all those other bloodlines that I was talking about. He might have a little bit of that nig in him. He might be a quarter nig, whatever. He's a eighth nig at best. You know what I'm saying? Like, you guys get what I'm saying? Like, these dudes are literally a mixture of a mixture of a mixture of different groups. Look, man, Hindi Chini, bye bye. Okay? Hindi Rusi, bye bye. I love winning. I love winning. But more than I love winning, I love my people. As funny as y'all see this before I decided I was done and I headed out. Take that to the bank, y'all. And once again, ask yourself, whoa, delete that. Sergey Brin, born in Moscow, Soviet Union, to Jewish parents. And then we got, what's my dude? Let's go to Google. It'll already be up there. I don't have to look for nobody. There we go. Sundar. Come on. Born right around the same time. Both foreigners. Understand that. The other dude, Craig, whatever his name is, something Craig, uh, I don't give a damn. Because two of the major cats for Google born outside of this country. I can't stress this shit enough. It never stops. They never stop being who they were. Okay? Man. Anyway, this will get to y'all whenever it gets to y'all.